Hi Owls, it is Thursday the 11th of February and it's time for what I think is going to be our final instalment of our book, which was, can you believe we finished the book already? Crazy. Well, we will have by today, I think. So we're going to continue the story with chapter 42, Home. And let's find out what happens to Tiga now that she is back in the land above the pipes. Tiga slid slowly up the pipe, tears running down her face, along with a lot of sludge and slime. She could feel her hat becoming smooshed and the beautiful black lace of her dress tearing around her legs. She emerged in the shed, all tattered and torn and covered in gunk. Her hat, now pointy, was sitting at a jaunty angle on top of her head. She stood hunched in the shed and exhaled. She was home. Well, sort of. The shed looked incredibly different. Instead of the old mouldy wooden walls, they were sleek and painted with multicoloured stripes, with lots of shelves filled with cheese. Miss Hex threw the door open and stomped in, her arms full of cheese. When she saw Tiga, she froze. The lumps of cheese in her hands fell to the floor. "Tiga Wickabim!" she seethed. Peggy Pigwiggle wins Witch Wars. The clumsy little thing whom everyone thought would be the first one out has won Witch Wars and is now top witch of Sinkville. A reporter sat down with her in her grand new home, Linden House, and asked her some questions. Reporter: "Why do you look so sad? You're rich and powerful now." Peggy: "My only friend is gone, and I need to figure out how to get her back." Reporter: "But you won. Aren't you just a little bit like, yes, I won, I won, I won?" Peggy: "No." Reporter: "Ah." Peggy: "Anything else?" Reporter: "Yes. What will be your first rule change?" Peggy: "No more riding on cleaners. All cleaners once travelled on can ride on their witches for 1 week." Note from the Ritzy City Post editor: "Wait, I think our reporter just did an entire interview without messing it up." And now a final word from Peggy's fairy, Bo. Bo: "I'm so glad Peggy won. I like to think I played a big part in her success." Reporter: "Bo, we all know you weren't there." Chapter 43, The Visitors. "I can't believe you didn't win," Miss Hex bellowed. "I knew it was you," Tiga said, pointing her finger at the witch. "You are never to set foot in this shed again. I want you in that kitchen stirring the cheese water, and that is all you will do from now on." Tiga stood tall and took a step forward. "You're one of the big exit witches, aren't you?" Miss Hex bowed. "Well, aren't you clever?" she said sarcastically. "Why did you nominate me?" "Wanted to get rid of you. Let that vile place down there deal with you." "It's not a vile place," Tiga yelled. If Tiga hadn't been yelling quite so loudly, she would have heard the scratching noise in the sink behind her. "It's the most beautiful place full of the most beautiful people, and a couple of evil ones, but mostly beautiful people." Miss Hex grunted and pointed past Tiga to the sink, where 3 disgustingly tattered witches and a fairy now stood. "Peggy," Tiga said. "My nose feels funny," said Peggy, rubbing a slightly flattened nose. Next to her stood what looked like Mrs. Brew and Fluffanora. Mrs. Brew's hat tapered to a long spindly point and then flopped over at the end. Her dress was in tatters. Fluffanora was 90% slime. "They weren't lying about pipe travel," she grumbled. "What are you doing here?" Tiga cried. She wanted to hug them, but she thought it best to stand squarely in the middle of the room, creating a barrier between her Ritzy City friends and evil Miss Hex. "We are here to take you back home to Ritzy City," Fluffanora said as she turned towards Miss Hex. "We want to adopt Tiga. She belongs with us." Miss Hex cackled. "Adopt?" "My mum here, Mrs. Brew, said she would," Fluffanora went on, pushing Mrs. Brew forward. I would love to, said Mrs. Brew. That's if you'd like me to, Teager. Yes! Teager screamed so loudly and so close to Miss Hex's ear that she winced and growled as Teager ran, arms outstretched, towards her 3 favourite witches, knocking them clean over. They all slowly turned to see Miss Hex's reaction. The old bat stood frozen to the spot. The stench of cheese combined with the length of time it was taking her to respond made the whole thing excruciating. Finally, she puffed out her cheeks, put her hands on her hips and yelled, "Take the brat! I'll be glad to be rid of her." Teager stared up at her in disbelief. "Really? I've been trying to find a way to get rid of her for years," said Miss Hex. "Useless thing, couldn't even win witch wars." "She could have won, but she let me win," Peggy said. Miss Hex narrowed her eyes at Teager. "Weak." "Well, if that's everything," Mrs. Brew said, grabbing onto the sink and pulling herself upright again, "I think we'll be off." Teager scooped up the little slug on the sink and put it in her pocket, and the 4 of them linked arms. "Bye, Miss Hex," she said. Miss Hex grunted, and then they were gone. "It's just as bad going in this direction," Fluffernusa shouted. "Miss Hex," came a voice from the rocking chair, "have you ever thought of storing something less pungent than cheese in here? Flowers, perhaps? Or bicycles?" "Out," Miss Hex said, without even looking where the voice was coming from. All right, Fran grumbled as she soared towards the sink. "Wait for me." Now we're on to chapter 44, Party in Ritzy. All up and down the street in Ritzy City, people were dancing. The sound of music filled the air and little lanterns bobbed above the heads of all the happy witches. "Clutterbucks," said a witch, holding a tray of drinks. Mrs. Brew squeezed Teager. "Ritzy City is now exactly how it should be." "You're back forever," squealed Peggy, skipping on the spot. Fluffernusa dived into the crowd of dancers and started pushing people out of the way to make room for her twirling. Teager spotted Felicity Bat standing in the shadows, her arms folded. She glared at Teager. Aggie Hoof was next to her, on her hands and knees, and sitting on top of her was Karen, who was grinning madly. She gave Teager the thumbs up. "Peggy, have you been making up new rules already?" Teager asked. Peggy smiled and waved at Karen. Aggie Hoof rolled her eyes. "Dance," Mrs. Brew said, gently nudging the pair of them towards the crowd. "Make room for me," screeched Fran as she shot into the middle. Teager danced for hours that night with the crowds from Ritzy City. They laughed and joked and drank clutterbucks and talked for hours about the old witch with the cart of disgusting hats and how her prediction had been so wrong. It wasn't an elegant witch who'd won. It was the dishevelled and brilliant Peggy Pigwiggle. "First time the old witch has been wrong," someone said. "She was so wrong," another cried. "She shouldn't be allowed to wear that I am never wrong badge." But the old witch just stood behind her cart and watched them, her wrinkly lips scrunched and spread into a crooked little grin, because she knew everything and she knew exactly what was coming next. And that's the end of the story, everyone. Wowzers. I really enjoyed it. I don't know about you. Now, we have got the whole set of these back in our classroom. It's what Miss Boone bought for us as her leaving present to us. So if you enjoyed it, when we are back at school, you could maybe read one of the others that are in the series. How exciting. And I will be starting a new book with you after half term for story time. But have a wonderful half term and I will see you next time. Bye everybody.